Hi, this is Gabe from FluentForever.com. In these 3 videos, I'm going to show you the bare essentials of phonetics and spelling for European Spanish, specifically the Castilian dialect, since that tends to be what you're going to hear if you're listening to Spanish movies, TV, etc. If you're using one of my pronunciation trainers, don't worry about memorizing this stuff. The trainer will do that for you. Just watch and pay attention. Everything you see here will show up sooner or later within the trainer. I'll be going through Spanish using the International Phonetic Alphabet, or IPA. This lets us simplify our discussion a lot, since I only need to talk about 30 or so symbols, many of which you know already, instead of trying to wade through nearly 130 spelling rules. So, that said, let's get started. We'll break this discussion up into 3 parts. The first will cover Spanish's consonants, the second will cover the vowels, and the third will cover a few of Spanish's spelling rules. Now, European Spanish has 27 consonants, and if you speak English, 13 of these are going to be relatively familiar sounds and familiar symbols. 7 will be relatively familiar sounds with unfamiliar symbols, and 7 more are really going to be new. Since I don't currently speak Spanish, I have a native speaker here, Elena,
Hello.
who'll be helping for this video. We'll be starting with 8 really straightforward sounds and symbols.
There's B as in bruja, F as in foca, G as in gallo, M as in mango, N as in nabo, S as in sirena, Z as in esmeralda, and W as in huerta.
Next, we have 5 familiar symbols that sound a little different than you're used to. We'll start with what looks like a D and a T.
There's D as in daga and T as in teléfono. If you're comparing these consonants in English and Spanish, you can say D and D.
If you pay close attention, you'll notice that in English, the very tip of your tongue hits the alveolar ridge, that ridge right behind your front upper teeth. D. But in Spanish, the tip of your tongue flattens out a bit, so that the tip of your tongue actually touches your upper teeth, and the blade of your tongue, that part right behind the tip, touches your alveolar ridge.
This gives you a less percussive sound. You get D instead of D. It's exactly the same for Spanish's T. Instead of T, you get T. And that puff of air you get when you say T, T, T is also gone. T, T, T.
So, let's move on to 2 more consonants that don't have big puffs of air in Spanish.
We have P as in pavo and K as in capa.
For both of these consonants, the difference between English and Spanish is all about that puff of air.
In English, there's peace, P, peace, and in Spanish, peace, P, peace. Same with K. In English, we have key, K, key, and in Spanish, key, K, aquí.
The last of our slightly modified consonants is Spanish's L.
As in lata.
It's a familiar symbol in IPA, it's a lowercase l, but it sounds a bit different from English. In English, when we say a word like lease, the back and front of your tongue will both come up towards the roof of your mouth. Lease. But in Spanish, only the tip of your tongue comes up, and it reaches just behind your front upper teeth.
Lease. English has lease, Spanish lease.
So next, we're going to cover 7 new symbols with mostly familiar sounds.
This symbol, which looks like a lowercase j, is Spanish's y, as in yuca, or English's u.
Now what complicates this story is that there is another version of this symbol, which looks like a J with a little curly tail at the end. That sound is basically the familiar English y sound, with a bit more grit to it.
Y, as in yuca.
The middle of your tongue is right next to the roof of your mouth.
Y, yuca. Or it may even touch the roof of the mouth for a second, producing y, yuca, inyección.
Depending upon the word, the dialect, the speaker, and even who they're talking to, you'll hear speakers switch between these various y sounds quite a bit. And while there are some rules about which ones to use when, they seem to be broken more often than followed. So basically, get used to hearing all of them, and you should be fine. So, next up, we have 3 more symbols that are going to be really familiar sounds.
There's th, as in Spanish's zapato, or English's thick. There's as in Spanish's banca, or English's bank.
This is an N produced with the back of your tongue instead of with the front.
And there's ch, as in Spanish's chancleta or English's cheese.
This is actually two sounds stuck together. It's a T and a sh together. Ch.
Last, we have Spanish's th, as in hada.
Now this one is actually the same symbol used for English's the sound, as in this or vi. The Spanish version is basically the same. Your vocal cords are buzzing, your tongue is right at your upper teeth. The only difference is that the Spanish sound is a little bit lighter.
The tongue isn't pressed as hard against the teeth, so you get sounds like see instead of see thee. See thee.
At this point, we've covered most of the Spanish consonants. We have 7 left, which will be entirely new for most English speakers. So first up, let's deal with the 2 Spanish R's. The first of these is usually the hardest one to pronounce. It uses the familiar-looking lowercase r as its symbol, and it's known as the trilled R.
It sounds like r, as in burro.
For this consonant, your tongue goes right up against your alveolar ridge. It softens a bit to allow air to come through, and as air comes through, it vibrates your tongue up and down against that ridge. There are a lot of tricks to producing this consonant, which you can find all over YouTube. The best one I've heard so far for pronouncing this consonant is to think the phrase Prince of Prussia while you're saying the phrase Prince of Prussia. You're replacing those R's with D's. And then you kind of play around until your tongue starts to cooperate. Prince of Prussia, Prince of Prussia, Prince of Prussia, Prince of Prussia. And this can take weeks or months. This thing can honestly be a bit of a pain to get right. So, the next consonant, the tapped R, is usually comparatively easy to pronounce. The symbol looks like a sort of tiny rounded off R-looking curve, and it's very easy to mistake for the trilled R symbol. You're mostly looking to see if there's a little line on the top left or not. If there's a line sticking up, it's the trilled R, and if not,
it's r, as in aro.
You know how the trilled R let your tongue flap up and down a bunch of times against your alveolar ridge? Well, this one flaps up and down just one time. It's basically a super fast D sound. And it's usually the first thing you get when you do that Prince of Prussia thing. Prince of Prussia. So, next up, we have Spanish's V as in cubo. This one looks like a capital B with a tail on it. And it sounds a lot like a combination of a B and a V. And because that's basically what it is. It's made by bringing both of your lips close together, but instead of closing them completely to form a B, abba, you let a little bit of air through and make V, ava.
A similar thing happens with Spanish's g, as in soga.
The symbol looks like a little V with a curlicue underneath, and it's pronounced in a similar way to a hard G sound, g, which is generally made by bringing your tongue all the way up in the back and closing off the flow of air, g, g. But for this consonant, instead of closing off the flow of air completely, you let a little bit of air through, and you get
g, soga, agua.
So let's stay at that exact same spot. Your tongue is up in the back right where you pronounced g and k. If you let air through in that exact same way, but you don't engage your vocal cords, there's no buzzing going down in your throat, then you get what looks like a lowercase x.
As in gelatina and girasol.
So next up, we have
Ñ, as in niños.
This one is written like a lowercase n and a j combined, and the International Phonetic Association chose that symbol for a reason. If you recall from earlier, the lowercase j symbol was y, as in English's you or yawn. For that consonant, the middle of your tongue was raised up towards the roof of your mouth, y. And for this consonant, it's the exact same motion. But the middle of your tongue doesn't just move towards the roof of your mouth, it actually touches it, stopping the airflow and forcing the air to come out of your nose. Ny, ny. You get that quick y sound at the end, just as your tongue moves on to pronounce the next vowel.
Niños.
And so I'll add one last sound here, and that is y as in llanta. This is basically the exact same position as ny. Your tongue is raised in the middle, touching your hard palate. The only difference is that in this case, instead of sealing off the flow of air completely and forcing it to flow out of your nose, the sides of your tongue come down a little bit and allow air to flow in the gap between your tongue and your upper teeth on both sides of your tongue. This produces a sound that's kind of like a combination between an L and a Y. Y, y, llanta. And you'll notice that I'm saying this sound instead of Elena, and that's because she has never said this sound in her entire life. And that's actually the case for many, if not most, Spanish speakers. Y is almost gone from the language.
But nowadays, this has mostly been replaced with y, as in llanta.
But still, you may hear some older speakers using it, and I think it's a neat consonant, so I wanted to include it here just for fun and completeness. So that's it for all the Spanish consonants. To quickly review, we had 8 familiar consonants with familiar symbols.
B as in bruja, F as in foca, G as in gallo, M as in mango, N as in nabo, S as in sirena, Z as in esmeralda, and W as in huerta.
We had 5 familiar symbols with slight modifications from English.
D as in daga,
Pronounced with the tip of your tongue against the teeth.
T as in teléfono,
Pronounced in that same way without a big puff of air.
P as in pavo, and K as in capa.
Also without big puffs of air. And
L as in lata.
Pronounced with only the front of your tongue. Then came 7 mostly familiar sounds with new symbols.
There's Y as in yuca, or if you're going to make it more gritty, then you can also say Y as in yuca, or even Y as in yuca. Th as in Spanish's zapato. As in Spanish's banca.
This is an N produced with the back of your tongue instead of the front.
T as in Spanish's chancleta. And Th as in hada.
Then came 7 entirely new sounds. The trilled R,
R as in burro.
the tapped R,
R as in aro. V as in cubo.
basically a V made with both lips,
As in soga.
made in the same place as G or K, but allowing a bit more air through,
As in girasol.
made in that same place but without any buzzing from your vocal cords,
And Ñ as in niños.
an N made with the middle of your tongue against the roof of your mouth, and last, Y as in llanta, an L made in that exact same spot, which has mostly been replaced by Y or Y in modern Spanish. And that is it for Spanish's consonants. Next up, vowels.